Really? Oh, so you have to put up once a year.
Good morning. Please take your seat. My name is Jeff Dunn. I'll be substituting for Jan DeVault this morning, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the 15th Battle of San Jacinto Symposium. This year's theme is called A Clash of Cultures, American Indians in Spanish, Mexican, and Anglo-Texan History. You know, when we started this symposium 15 years ago, we were warned that we'd run out of ideas and we'd run out of speakers, but we haven't. And this year we focus on a topic that we've never before focused upon, the role of American Indians during a period of time that was very critical to Texas history. And one thing about us Texans is that we take our history very seriously, and nothing is more important than to the Texan identity than this period that we call the Texas Revolution, the period of the 1820s through the 1830s and into the Texas Republic period. The symposium is sponsored by the San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy, which is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. It has two primary missions. First is to reclaim, restore, and preserve the San Jacinto Battleground, which was the site of the battle between the Mexican and Texan Army on April 21st, 1836. And the second mission is to help promote scholarship and research on the Battle of San Jacinto to create greater public awareness, which of course is what we're doing today. The program is also sponsored by and supported by a number of donors, which are listed in your program. And I'd like to mention them right now. First is the Texas State Historical Association, also the Center for the Study of the Southwest at the Texas State University, Humanities Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment of the Humanities, the C. Howard Piper Foundation, William Reeves Fine Art, which sponsored our patrons party last night, Graphics Impression, the Houston Archaeological Society, and the Lancaster Hotel. We appreciate all of the support that each of those organizations has provided to us. In addition, this event, as it has always been, has been organized completely by volunteers. We have a San Jacinto Symposium Volunteer Committee. Graham Painter will be introducing each of those members at lunch today. When we had our first symposium in 2001, it took some coaxing, but we had Dr. Jim Crist as one of our featured speakers. He's a professor of history at North Carolina State University. He did so well, and he asked so many questions during the second symposium that we asked him to come back at the third symposium and be our moderator, and he's been our moderator ever since, to great acclaim by our audience. He is, even though he teaches at North Carolina State, he is a Texan. He was born in Henrietta in Northwest Texas. He received his undergraduate degree from Rice University and a PhD from Yale. He is one of the preeminent Texas historians. We also have here today to help introduce the speakers, Frank de la Teja at Texas State University, who also is one of the preeminent Texas historians, and a former the first Texas State historian. So without further ado, I'd like to, again, welcome everyone here, and I'll welcome Jim, and he will begin our program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff was being kind when he said I ask a lot of questions. I was actually a heckler in the audience. at the second San Jacinto Symposium, and to keep me from doing that, they made me moderator, because I can't bother people when I'm the moderator. One of the reasons that we have not run out of ideas in 15 years is because of the injection of Frank de la Teja as a sponsor and co-moderator. He has brought a great deal of energy, a great deal of knowledge, and resources to the San Jacinto Symposium, and I'll be introducing him in just a minute, but I didn't want to forget to say how grateful we are for his participation. I was trained in the history of the American West before that meant taking the Indians really that seriously as people. I had no American Indian anthropology. We studied the peoples and cultures of Africa in my Rice years in cultural anthropology, and I really have suffered from that loss over time. One of the writers about American Indian history that has really influenced me a great deal, though, even though he's very controversial and he may not even be in the profession anymore, is a person with the very Protestant name of Calvin Luther Martin. He left Protestantism, but he kept the name. And he said something really interesting in an anthology that he did on the American Indians and the problem of history. And that is, when you talk about American Indian history, you're using three words, and more importantly, three concepts that were essentially foreign to most of the people that Columbus called Indians and that we still call American Indian. The concept of America, whether you're talking about the United States, as so many people of this country do, or everything between the Arctic and Tierra del Fuego, that concept of America as a place, certainly with an Italian name from Amerigo Vespucci, was foreign to the people who lived here. It was not one of their concepts. In addition to American, Indian was a concept foreign to them. They did not see their nearest neighbors as brothers. Many of the names we use as tribal names today originally meant those bad people over on the other place. And so the concept of Indian as one people, or people essentially alike, is about like talking about Europeans. You know, the Italians, the Swedes, the Ukrainians, they're all just alike. That was an idea that some people brought to this continent, which the people who first lived here did not share. And even more controversial, the idea of history. The Western idea of history as a kind of linear progression, each building in a progressive way from the last events, is really foreign to a kind of cyclical understanding and what is essentially a mythic understanding of one's origins. Now, Western people have mythic understandings of their origins too. Not only things like Adam and Eve, but the Texas creation myth that most of us were taught who are of my age. And the myth is not false. It just exists on a different plane than truth and falsehood. But you ought to keep in mind, as we talk about American Indian history, that you need to open your minds and be ready to understand the world from a different perspective, and to see Texas from a different perspective than perhaps you have seen before. And I think that's one of the most important reasons that we decided to do this theme this year. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our spark plug. I'm a kind of worn out piston, but Frank is our new spark plug. So Jesus Francisco de la Teja, Frank de la Teja, please introduce our morning speakers.
Well, good morning, and I'm happy to see the turnout on a, it means that you didn't float away last night. We certainly got a taste of Houston spring weather, and I was commenting that of all the times I've been to Houston, I hadn't experienced one of these, so I guess it was about time to get soaked. Fortunately, it was warm enough that I didn't catch pneumonia last night, but it was certainly interesting. The theme again, and we keep coming back to the importance of this theme and how it is different from things that we've done in the past, but I think what it reflects also is something that is going on with this symposium, and that is that it is reaching beyond not just the obvious, but reaching beyond and I don't mean it in a bad sense at all, but the parochial interest in the battle, that we can contextualize the Battle of San Jacinto or San Jacinto, whichever way you want to say it, in different ways. But in order to be able to contextualize it, we have to have a broader understanding. We have to have the context, if you will, that allows us to put things in a broader perspective, particularly as we move into a 21st century that is increasingly diverse and multicultural. Houston is one of the most cosmopolitan places in the world. And that means that not only are we experiencing an economic boom that is built on the world economy, but it also means that the world is coming to Houston. And so the Houston community is made up of all different kinds of people. And in the previous, what Jim referred to as the version of history he was taught when he was young, and I didn't grow up in Texas, so I didn't get that version of history. But but I know the version of history that was taught, and it was a very narrowly focused version of history that essentially only had room for those people coming from the United States that we now consider Anglo. It didn't have room for others. And yet the important thing, as we got last year with Tejanos, as we get this year with the American Indian perspective, as we'll do in other years when we visit other themes, there were other communities here. There were other peoples here. This was a diverse place. It was diverse in different ways than it is now, but it was no less diverse. And understanding that diversity and understanding the variety of interests of those different communities that made up what we call Texas, but with many of these people did not call Texas at all. They had different names for these places, and one of them wasn't Texas. Those perspectives are very important in order to make sense of that history to the new Texan. And the new Texan can look and sound and believe in many very different ways. And so that's my message to you, to keep in mind that we're exploring not just other perspectives of Texas history, but that we're preparing ourselves to understand, by understanding that Texas history, we understand the Texas of today and the Texas of tomorrow, which needs that broader, more complex understanding of the place. And that brings us then, and we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great because it means that the vendors outside will have a more opportunity when we take our break to sell you some of their wares, and please try to patronize them because they help support the symposium. And that's also a very important thing to do, that we support our vendors, and that hopefully we support our authors. A couple of their books are out there, and so grab a copy and get an autograph. It makes us feel real good when people come up and ask us for our autographs. We're not the Tom Clancy's of the world, so our groupies are much smaller in number, but they're no less important to us. We start off with that big background, that underlying understanding of the native world, the way it was when people from the old world, the other side of the Atlantic, came along and started messing things up, right? Juliana Barr presently teaches at the University of Florida, but as of fall of this year, she will be at Duke. And but she won't actually start until fall of next year because she's spending this coming year at the Huntington Library in California, where she's gotten a year's leave to do work. And some of you may be familiar with the Huntington. It's one of the premier research collections in the world. It is a mecca for people studying various aspects of American in world history, and it is certainly a big feather in your cap to be able to get one of their grants to work there. Her work on Native Americans in the borderlands is widely recognized, and she sits with me as a member of a content advisory team for the Bullock Museum as the first floor of the museum gets reinstalled around the bell. And if you don't know about that project, I'll be happy to talk to you during the break, but that's a wonderful opportunity to reinterpret the whole experience of early Texas from a very different perspective than was done the first time around. So she's working on that. And she came to the Bullock in part because she had already done groundbreaking work on the relationship between Spaniards and Indians in Texas. She has a award-winning book, Peace Came in the Form of a Woman, from the University of North Carolina Press, and which I strongly suggest to you for getting a very different understanding of what we like to call and what I like to call personally Spanish Texas, and some on the other side of the fence from the way she looks at things. It's about power relations, and the interesting thing is the power from Peace Came in the form of the woman, in the form of a woman's perspective, is the Indians are in charge, and which is a very different way of looking at early Texas history from the way it was taught to most Texans and the way it is generally interpreted today. Right now, she's, and I'll let you read the other details in our program, but I would like to say that she is currently at work and also on a very interesting and different project. The book, the forthcoming book, the one she's researching right now, is called La Dama Azul, a Southwestern origin story of early America, and it's essentially interpreting the story of the Lady in Blue who made an appearance to the Indians out in far west Texas during the 17th century. As a Native American origin story that then incorporates Europeans. And so her topic today then is that broad Indian background that lays the groundwork for understanding Indians that are going to be in the mix during the Revolution and then during the Republic period. And so with no further ado, Juliana Barr.
Well, I want to begin by thanking our sponsors and by thanking Frank and Jim for having me here. It's always nice to get back to Texas. All my family are here. And so it's very nice to be here. And that was a lovely introduction, Frank, so thank you very much. And I can work the technology. Yay. So what I want to address today, so we're going to go back. I'm going to take you back to the 16th century, and then we're going to come forward and then not go any farther past 1800. But what I want to talk about today is how we can better understand the power of American Indians in their relations with Europeans in those first 3 centuries of contact, but then also try to look at very specifically, because I think the question arises, right? What are our sources for understanding Indian perspectives, and how can we get at some understanding of this power that they may have exerted? And so what I want to say is that, in fact, European sources tell us this very, very clearly. And I want to talk about one group of sources today, and that is maps. Because I think that, in fact, European maps offer some of the clearest proof of American Indian power if we read them carefully. So just to start with the one that I was just showing you. Oh, and I'm not going to be able to walk much, am I? Okay, well, so what you're looking at is half of a map. This would cover an entire wall, probably about this size. So it's half of a map of the entire world. So, of course, this is just the Western Hemisphere. And it is associated with a man, Antonio Pereira, who was a Portuguese explorer in South America. And what we know is that the map most likely dates to 1545 because of the information it has on it. And so what we can see at this point, looking at this map, is this is the sum total of everything that the Portuguese and the Spanish knew and had learned from travel reports, and particularly this follows the first exploration of the Amazon River. So if you look at the map, what you're going to see is, okay, 3 Portuguese flags, and if you can see the little squares all over the Americas, right? So there are 3 Portuguese flags, there are 2 flags with the French fleur-de-lis, and there are 13 Spanish standards, all of them, please note, along the coastlines, right? They haven't gotten very far. This is only 50 years after Columbus. So we're just arriving if we are Europeans. So if you also look at the map, then what you can see is that, of course, the vast interior remains an unknown. There is not much detail that you're seeing yet. And then if you look at the ocean, you can see that there are multiple ships. There's a ship with the Portuguese cross of Christ, which signifies that it is a ship of exploration. And then, of course, it becomes then the national or imperial flag when you are planting it in ground and claiming it for your king. You can also see then 5 Spanish ships in the Pacific Ocean. And so what you can see then is this moment, advancement of knowledge and technology, right, that Europeans are able to come to the Americas. But of course, these maps tell us far more than just that, because of course, maps are machinations of geopolitics as well. This is the quintessential map of, well, if we thought about a 5-year-old child or 2 5-year-old children arguing about a toy, and they're saying, mine, mine, mine. This is the breathless progression of, I see it, I want it, I own it, right? They are planting flags, claiming things that they do not yet have or control. So this is desire, not reality yet, that we're seeing on this map. And if you'll notice as well, across North America, you may not be able to see the words, I'm guessing, with this light. But there's a huge blue banner, and it says Nueva España. So Spain is claiming all of it. It's all ours. And so what you can see with this map, and this is one of multiple maps that are going to be produced over the next 3 centuries, is that this is an attempt to legitimate claims. Back in Europe, this map is being made in Europe, and it's like, this is what we've got. I've already claimed it all. And so as one historian of maps, one of the most famous historians of maps, Brian Harley, has argued is, maps are tools of imperialism just as much as guns and warships. So we need to understand when we look at these maps that they're not necessarily just a reflection of reality, but of geopolitical goals. So all in all, what we see is this is Europeans in motion. This is the moment when they are turning oceans from barriers into highways. They are the ones building commercial empires on the water. I mean, this is what the Spanish and the Portuguese are famous for, right? This is how they will build their global empires, by the ocean. And so we can also see then that politically maps function then as sort of boasts of power. or as rival battles, a paper war, if you will. If the King of England has this map and he claims that these are the lands we have, and the King of Spain has this map. And so they're raging in a paper war of different maps and colored flags, and who is going to get to where first and claim it, and it's all ours. We might also see it as having economic aspirations, right? They're going to produce these maps to encourage colonists, to encourage investors to say, look, isn't it nice? And it looks very peaceful. And have you noticed yet? It looks very empty. So it's going to be a nice, safe place to go, and it's going to be a valuable place in which to invest. And so if you look at this map and then think back to images that we get from Hollywood of what pre-Columbian America was like, or what our textbooks tell us in our history classes. In fact, it looks like Pereira's like, oh yeah, this is what we know, right? That the pre-Columbian world, and let's just look at a nice textbook map. So the pre-Columbian landscape, vast, empty, open spaces, wilderness, waiting for these lovely Europeans to arrive and start settling and colonizing and filling it with people. We may have a few Indian names, but they sort of float free up in the stratosphere. Indian lands have no lanes. There are no borders, there are no lines, political markers dividing them. Indian towns, if they appear, have no names. And Indians, again, sparsely occupy the landscape. We think of them primarily, oh, they're just hunters and gatherers, and they're kind of wandering around these tiny family groups, and there's just not much there. That, in fact, pre-Columbian America is waiting. They're waiting for Europeans to arrive. They're waiting for history to start. And so we wait. And then when European explorers, conquistadores, arrive, they begin trampling around, cutting through the wilderness, exploring unexplored, undiscovered lands. And so, again, completely blank map. Right? There's nothing there. They're going to hack their way through the wilderness. You know, think about the swamps in Florida. That's going to be a mess. How are we going to get through all the dry, arid deserts of West Texas? Think about poor Coronado suffering through the Llano Estacada. And then, as our textbook story goes, when they, detail. When they do encounter Indians, you know, lo and behold, every once in a while, there might be a few you run into. Easy conquest. And so if you look down at the base of this map, you actually do see a little label that's telling you where the Mexica Empire was, the fierce Aztecs, who the Spanish, 200 men, yeah, we wiped them out. Let's not, of course, pay any attention to the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Taxlaxans who actually were the ones who overthrew the Aztecs and just had the Spanish along for fun. No, it's going to be easy conquest. So that's the moment, right? Our explorers have arrived. They're going to make those flags become real. We're going to back up our claims with settlement, and we now begin in our textbooks, drawing lines. So, of course, the first lines we see tend to be, okay, what's the French going to claim? What did the Spanish get? What did the English get? And so we have dividing the Americas all up into rival territorial claims. Indians are getting fewer and fewer. We're keeping them erased from the land and from the history. And the key is, of course, if Indians don't have any borders and they don't have any lands and they're very few and far between, then of course they don't have claims to the land and no one is dispossessing them, no one is conquering them. It's just the land is empty and waiting to be taken. It's there for the taking. So we might pause to consider then, here's another textbook map, what it means when you start seeing maps inscribed with New Spain, New France, New England, New Netherlands, right? It's rewriting the entire American landscape, historical landscape, as something new that's being newly created by Europeans. And of course, it's denying any Indian presence or past, right? That this is a land that had no history. It's new, it's the new world. And so again, we erase Indians. And I should say, just to give you a few more, now we'll go back to real maps. Well, in just a second. The British are the best at erasing Indians in their maps. Because we're going to talk about the difference, because Texas actually shows us a very different story. So this is one of my favorite maps. Can anyone see the problem? In that it's saying that this is the United States in 1750, which would be 26 years before the United States ever existed. But somehow, no, we can draw our lines. Or consider this very famous map drawn in 1755 by John Mitchell, a British cartographer. And what you're seeing are the states of Virginia and the Carolinas, and the lines go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So the state of Virginia goes all the way to the Pacific. We haven't seen the Pacific. We don't know that California exists, but no, Virginia is going to claim all of it, all the way across the continent, regardless of anyone there. This is Thomas Jefferson's plan in 1784 for the Northwest, right? This is when he's about then to figure out the Northwest Territory and talk about it settling. But look, he's already given you what he thinks the states are going to be and where they're going to be. He's drawing his lines, keeping in mind, of course, that this land is absolutely covered with Indian nations who possess it and who might be a little shocked to find themselves with lines through their lands. And then, of course, here are some of the great names he was going to give to those states. I'm particularly fond of Sylvania. I was thinking he's looking forward to TVs already. Okay, so we have maps. These are geopolitical documents. They often are far more fantasy than fact. The reality, of course, is quite different. That if we actually had a map that showed us what North America looked like in 1491, it would look something like this. There was not a shred of land not claimed and occupied by Indians and Indian nations. And so how do we, in this moment, understand that if all we have are the maps that I've just outlined for you? And the key is, of course, that we do have far different European maps. And so what I want to talk about from here on out are actual maps from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries from Europeans that actually show the Americas, and particularly Texas, as a land absent of European conquest. That in fact, it was a world of European powers who had to recognize Indian sovereignty. They had to bow down before Indian power, oftentimes. And the key becomes to distinguish between maps. If maps are drawn in Seville or Paris or London, they're going to look like Perea's map that I started with, right? They're going to be far more about the aspirations and the dreams and the goals of kings and parliaments. But when we look at the maps drawn by Europeans who are actually over here on the ground, trying to get somewhere and trying to live through the day to see a new sunrise, their maps look quite different in terms of what they tell us about the Americans and about Indians. Because, of course, when Europeans went into the woods, they didn't go into wildernesses. They traveled on thoroughfares and highways that had long been cut and laid by Indians. One of the best stories I can give you comes from 1685, when one of the Frenchmen who travels with La Salle compares the highway that runs through Caddo lands in East Texas. He says, you know, this highway is as wide and level and cleared as the highway that runs from Paris to Orleans. So this highway is just as good as anything, or maybe even the same as one of our best highways in France. And that's a highway built by the Caddo. when Europeans move across this landscape, they cross from one border to another. They're constantly leaving one Indian nation's lands and entering another. And they will map this too. And I think the most notable thing is that their maps show this. So why? And just to give you a map, and I'm going to keep going over the Americas for a bit before we focus in on Texas. So this is a map of all of Canada. What France will claim as New France, and this is by Samuel Champlain, one of the most famous French explorers. And if we zero in, and those are the Great Lakes you can see in the middle. If we zero in, you see this landscape is absolutely covered with the most minute detail of where every single Indian town can be found, every single Indian village, every single Indian trading post. Where are their corn crops? Where are their fields? Where can we find them? Because, of course, the #1 imperial goal of the French in Canada is to somehow find a way into the incredibly valuable and profitable fur trade that Indians control. And so if you want in on this and you want to be able to start shipping furs back to Europe, you've got to know where to go to find these trading allies, to find where to build political alliances so that they will work with you, so that they will allow you into their trading networks. So one of the reasons that these maps show such detail is that the Spanish and French come over because their imperial goals involve Indians. They will be inclusive. Now, we don't necessarily have to imagine that inclusion is a positive thing. To be included as a laborer in the Spanish encomienda system, maybe not so nice. But all I'm saying is that the Spanish and French, if they are to achieve their goals in the Americas, they need Indians. And so they need to know where to find them. So they are going to map these landscapes. But the other thing is that, of course, you actually have to know where you are in the landscape, and you have to know whose land you're standing on, and you have to know, when I cross this river, whose land am I entering, because where am I safe and where am I in danger? So let's just imagine, for example, a Spanish citizen of San Antonio de Bejar at mid-century after the alliance or the treaties with Apaches, right? So you're riding down the highway and you are paying attention to where you're going. You're safe as long as you are in Apache lands because you have just negotiated a treaty with the Apache and you are now considered an ally. As soon as you leave Apache lands and you enter Comanche lands, you have a target on your back and you are in deep doo-doo. So you have got to know, where is that point when I leave Apache lands and enter Comanche lands? Your life can depend upon it. So that's the other reason then for these maps being so detailed. And so here we've got, let's stick with the big one for a minute. One of the best known maps of Spanish Texas from 1728. And it's, of course, all the northern provinces, but we're focusing in on the part that's showing Texas. And what becomes fascinating then, too, in these incredibly detailed maps, predominantly of the Spanish and the French, is that they confirm native sovereignty and power. In this detail, in knowing and having to know whose land lies where, they're also writing into their maps confirmation of this. And so we can look at this big, beautiful map, but if we zero in on details, there we go. All over that map, well, let's go back for a second. If you think, so it looks like they're just little Indian villages scattered around, but when you start reading all his detailed labeling, what he's telling you is that everywhere, this is the Tierra del Carrizos, this is the Tierra del Pampoas, this is the land of Pampoas. They are not saying this is Spanish land, this is the land of all these different groups, and every single inch of this map shows which part of the map belongs to who, and it's all, again, Indian nations. So the bottom line then is that Europeans are not simply traveling through native homelands, they are subject to native rules and controls of Indian jurisdiction and geopolitics. If you think about it, if you want to go to Mexico tomorrow or Canada tomorrow, there are going to be certain rules that you have to play by to enter those nations. And this is what the Spanish and the French are doing too. So first, now I want to just give you some examples very quickly of how European maps document awareness of Indian power in general in the Americas. And we'll just look at maps and how they change a bit over time, and then we'll zero in on Texas. So first, I should say, the earliest maps do have blank spaces, but not because they're erasing Indians yet. They just haven't gotten there yet, and they have no idea what's going on. So you can see this map over here, totally blank. Or this one, this French map that says, okay, yeah, we just don't know this part, right? This part remains unknown. We will know it soon. We know there are people there, but we haven't gotten there yet. But the majority of maps have actually rather fun and interesting ways of showing Indian power. One of the funnest, I think, are giants. They are not necessarily telling us that Indians were 8 feet tall when they draw these things, but this is a very common thing that you will see in maps. This is, of course, a map of Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, and it's got the Indian and the Spaniard matching off, but of course the Indian is much bigger. Or you could see this one here in far more beautiful color, and we've got this, again, standoff. Or perhaps the one that we in this room probably know the best, John Smith. And how does he try to convey the power of the Powhatan Confederacy? And he has his giant warrior at the top of the map. Or, of course, he says, I took on Opechancanough myself, who, of course, was Powhatan's brother. But look at how I struggle. This is a mighty challenge. And so he's trying to tell us this power that he's facing. Now, of course, if we all keep in mind that John Smith loved to tell tall tales, and he's the one we know about Pocahontas from, he's also, of course, telling us, see, I was the David to the Powhatan Goliath. And so he's bragging. But he is telling us fundamentally about Indian power. Or if we look at their maps of the coastlines, we do not see empty lands at all. We see lands covered in settlements, and this is North Carolina. Or we pop up to Plymouth, and you can see all these very large homes with fields completely surrounded. So where are you going to land? Where's going to be safe, right? That's completely surrounded. Or even still farther up, Cape Cod and the Champlain's map. Or Texas. This is, again, Texas. Now, you should probably try to imagine the map is turned sideways. So that's the Gulf at the bottom that you're seeing there. But this is clearly, there are Indians everywhere. Where do we go? They occupy this land. So we've got giants. We've got settlement blanking coastal areas. We also have big cities. And so here's, again, an even bigger close-up of the Perea map. And if you look in the center, keeping in mind this is 1545, he's not telling you that Europeans have built big cities yet. He's telling you that there are huge Indian cities. And of course, he's basing this, of course, on his knowledge of Tenochtitlan, the great Aztec city. And so in here is Hernán Cortés's great design, which in fact reflects total Aztec knowledge and understandings of the city as a cosmic linchpin that sort of united and brought together the natural and supernatural world. So the powers of man and the power of the gods. And so this is what we're seeing. But it is a great, huge city. We tend to know only of this one. But these maps tell us far more. So here is Hochelaga, which was an Iroquois city, which will be found in the 16th century, and then when they go back in the 17th, the Iroquois have actually moved, and this is where Montreal will be established in its place, because clearly where Indians had designated a good site for the city, Europeans will follow along. But what you're looking at is a very stylized design and understanding of the city so that Europeans would understand what they're looking at. So if you can look very clearly, if you can see any of these letters, A is telling you that that's the city gate, that this is like a walled medieval city. That D is the home of the king, and this is all in the, I'm basically translating your key here, that K is the inner wall and that L is the outer wall, so it has multiple defensive walls in which to go in. So again, they're trying to say, they have cities like ours, like these walled medieval cities. Or we can go a little further south and look at a Dutch map of Mohican towns in northeastern North America. And you can see at the very top, uppermost, I'm trying to give you a sense of the larger landscape so that you can see. Please note all the deer, the furred animals, the beaver, who of course are going to be absolutely essential to the fur trade that the Dutch are most interested in. So of course they're telling you what's valuable on this map, but they're also saying, and who has the power and who controls all that fur. And so these palisaded cities that they're showing us are trying to say, look, these are sophisticated military powers that we've got to deal with, but they're also very prestigious and prosperous, and this is why we want to form alliances with them. They are sophisticated, economically prosperous people. And so what you can see then is that these maps, all these various maps, are showing us a world in which Europeans learned quickly and mapped very carefully the Indian communities and nations and cities with whom they were going to have to negotiate if they wanted to succeed in establishing trade, in establishing missions, in establishing profitable labor regimes, and in terms of setting up settlements. You can't just go and pop a tent anywhere, right? You are going to, if you pop a tent somewhere and someone doesn't want you, they're going to come and wipe you out. And if we can think about the Powhatan War of 1622, I mean, the English are wiped out in Virginia because they make people angry. So we're going to map this, and we are going to know who we're dealing with. And what this is all telling us is that this is a landscape that is being defined by economic deals, right? Who are we going to find profitable relationships with, like with the Dutch? But this is a land of foreign diplomacy, that they are not using these terms. The Spanish will say nation. They'll all talk about kings and lords and rulers and emperors and kingdoms. And they're not just doing this to translate the Americas into terms that other Europeans will understand. They are saying we are dealing with powerful people and we recognize it because we have to, again, if our goals are to succeed and if we are to survive day to day. Okay, so now let's focus on Texas. And what I want to do is show you 3 examples of 3 different native groups so that we can look at maps and see how they show native jurisdictions and power on the ground within bordered domains. So I want to look first at the Caddo, and then the Coateca speakers, and then Apaches and Comanches. So let's start with the most obvious. Obviously the Caddo, right, must be the clearest. They had this massive, populous, powerful nation that the Spanish reported had a king, and they had great lords, and they ruled with lieutenants over a people spread over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. And this gives you this aerial view so that it's clear, right? Their lands extended over Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. So it was a massive and powerful nation. The Spanish and the French would record that they had so many numerous cities that they extended for miles. So here is another city. Of course, this is the famous one drawn by Terán de los Rios. But a French missionary will say that he believed that this city extended for 53 miles. So it gives you a sense of the breadth of the city and that there were multiple ones. So they were so numerous of people that they had large cities. They were so powerful that their warriors were feared by all neighboring groups. They were so organized that they had a hierarchical governing system. They had an agricultural economy so successful that every single community member had his own or her own multi-storied home. And I should say, if I translate this to give you some sense of the little hamlets or cantons of a village, and then you can see their agricultural fields, and so you can see this prosperity. The Spanish would say they maintained, they knew very well, and they'd heard from multiple people, those in New Mexico, that the Caddo kingdom, the kingdom of the Tejas, had a material trade that sat at the center of this massive trading network that extended to New Mexico, to the Gulf of Mexico, but then also to the Great Lakes. So they had trade goods from all over the continent. And they had a government so well run that it oversaw people's properties and crops when they were away on business. So of course the Spanish are going to be very attracted to the notion of such a powerful, prosperous kingdom. These are people we would like to know. But it's not going to be so easy, because they will also learn very carefully that this nation is so extensive that no one knows where it ends, because the great lord of the Tejas does not permit foreign nations to enter the interior of his country. How do we get in? And so what becomes fascinating is that if you read the expedition narratives of French and Spanish groups who seek out the Caddo and want to make overtures and set up relations, that they will go through the same admission rituals and border control. And you can see it happen over and over and over again when you read these expedition narratives. So what's going to happen is that it's easiest if we think about the Caddo domain as having rings, and that they build out. And so what happens is, okay, so we'll imagine a Spanish expedition coming up south, right? And you hit the border, which is the outermost ring. Oh, and we met some hunters. And they said, oh, hey, why don't you stop here? And, we're gonna send some word ahead that, you're here. And you just hang out for a bit, and we'll keep you company. So, of course, you've been stopped, and you're now being guarded. But, it's not very polite. No, we're just going to send word in to, our king that you're here. And so you hang out with your guards. More groups come, and they say, okay, we will allow you to proceed. And so you now enter. But you are always with escorts, which we should understand, of course, are guards. You always stay on the state highway. There will be no wandering off, please. Keep to the road, keep to the road. Keep with us. We're taking you there. And so then what they describe is that as they're going into the core, right, they're going to go through these hunting territories, and they're going to see hunting lodges first. Then you see outer villages. Then you'll see larger commercial and ceremonial town centers. And it's only at the core, at the very center, do you reach the Caddi complexes, the ceremonial complexes of the Caddo leadership, who were known as Caddi, so chief or cacique, but the Caddo would say Caddi. And this is where the paramount leader is, and this is then where business is done, and you finally reach the center. But the Spanish will chart that it takes about almost 400 miles to get to that center. So imagine the defensive capabilities and the control, right? That they control this massive domain, they've surrounded themselves with these rings, and no one is getting in. And what becomes striking is that there is no Caddo city that is palisaded. And the Caddo are very close neighbors of the Wichitas, who live farther north on the plains. The Wichitas have palisaded villages. The Caddo don't need them because, my goodness, no one's going to get near them. So everything is safe once you're inside. And then once you're inside, if you're going to move around within the Caddo domain, you're going to need a passport that shows you've actually met with somebody and you've been okayed. So different Spanish and French travelers will also be given different things that will symbolize a passport that you can take this to the next village and they will welcome you, or i.e. they won't kill you because we know that you're here and someone said it's okay. And so then when we then look at the Spanish maps that then detail this, and again, this is going back to the same 1728 map by Barreiro, what you're going to see is that, in a sense, what the Spanish and French are going to do is they're going to set up missions and presidios and towns that we will come to know as Natchitoches and Nacogdoches and Los Cedes. But these are embassies, these are consulates. Yeah, okay, you want to build in the middle of our nation? All right, we will give you permission. And then, of course, the second you misbehave or do something we don't like, we're going to boot you out. And so we need to then understand what these earliest settlements look like. And so we can see, too, I think, if you look way over on the right corner, you can see Los Cedes. Look, they're just dwarf. They're just tiny. You know, they've got 50 people there. You're not conquering anybody when you got 50 people in the middle of this massive Caddo domain. Okay, so onward ho. Let's look at the Coatecas. Seems a little less obvious there, right? We tend to have a scholarly reluctance to talk about homelands when it comes to hunters and gatherers. But here, too, we can see clear territorial claims and borders and spaces of control. And what you have is that in the summer, you've got these small groups, yes, and they do move around. But in the summer, they come together in these very large shared encampments. And then in the winter, they may divide up into smaller groups to go hunting, to be less of a burden on natural resources when natural resources become slimmer, and so we've got to move around. But none of their movement is random. The affiliated groups always move in certain corridors that they claim only for themselves. They don't move into other people's corridors and claims of natural resources. And these shared encampments that we see represent sort of the Confederation as a whole, right? That it's a group that comes together in the summer. This is when they court. This is when they have they broker economic deals. This is when they renew diplomatic alliances. And these centers will be what the Spanish call rancheria grandes. And they will notice as they come in that, oh, hey, we always see these rancheria grandes in the same places. And you can see them in the square hatch mark areas in the north of the map. But here, very clear controls again. Henri Joutel will talk about being told that, well, the Colorado River is our border. We never cross it unless we're going to war. So it's clearly the border between us and them. Those are enemies we don't cross. We recognize this border. There will be a Spanish missionary who is brought to one leader on charges of trespass because he was traveling with another group of Indians and they trespassed. And so he was brought before it on charges. You've been trespassing where you shouldn't be, because he was with this other group. And the Spanish will say that the number one cause of conflict in any warfare is in fact questions of trespass, that you have violated borders. And so then when you think about San Antonio, and I should say too, if we look again at the detail of the Brea map, if you think about the territory of the Pampoas, these are all Coateca speakers. So it's not just that the Caddo and the Comanche are recognized as powerful. The Spanish are recognizing even these small bands. These are their lands, and we recognize that they have borders and that they control these areas. So what's going to happen if you want to build a mission in the middle? Well, what's going to happen is that, of course, the Mission Presidio complex is going to function as another shared encampment. And so San Antonio is basically established at one of the sites of these large shared encampments. And then each mission represents an alliance with a different confederation. And if you then think about that these shared encampments are different ethnic groups who come together and they're in a political alliance with one another, the Spanish are just another ethnic enclave in this confederation. So sure, you can come and stay here, but so it's not that somehow Indians are giving up sovereignty or control by entering missions. It's that the Spanish have come to them and they've set up a mission at the site of one of their shared encampments. And the Indians are basically saying, sure, you can be here too. And if you think about Spanish Franciscans who bemoan the Indians who never stay, it's like, well, of course they don't stay, because this is just a shared encampment that we use in the summers and then we go elsewhere. And so they're not changing their territorial boundaries or anything. It's just they've allowed the Spanish within their own. So the third case would be the Apaches and Comanches. Again, a mobile people. to whom we do not ascribe territory, right? Oh my God, all they did was move around in other people's lands and raid. But of course, we've got to understand that raiding is a growth strategy. Raiding isn't warfare. It is a way to expand your territory, expand the domination of your people. It is as much geopolitical as economic. And how do you control these areas? You keep pushing out and out and out. We talk a lot about how the Apaches and Comanches had this traditional blood feud. Like, no, they didn't. They were in this massive border war with one another. They were two massive powers, and they're just fighting for control and land and bison and natural sources. And these two together, of course, are going to stop all Spanish movement north in their tracks. So again, if we look at this map, if you can see Mission San Saba way over in the tiny corner on the left lower point, right? That's going to be the one time that the Spanish try to go north of San Antonio, and then they're just going to get slapped back. And they're like, okay, we won't go there again, we promise. And so what we need to think about the Apaches and Comanches is that they too are moving around in these very large shared encampments made up of families. And they control territory by moving around their lands. I'll go back to this one. And so if you're moving around in these large rancherias, you can place the rancherias and always have them moving where they need to be so that they can be border defense, or they can be expanding out, or they can be a base for further raiding south for horses, for cattle. And if you look at the descriptions of Spanish expeditions who finally, after the peace with the Comanches in 1785, can finally, for the first time ever, travel to New Mexico, because of course they haven't been able to, because if you wanted to do that, you would have to go through Apache and Comanche lands, and you're not going because you're not going to be allowed across. When they finally are allowed across, they too only travel with Comanche guards and escorts. But they will describe Comanche rancherias as massive cities, that these are huge cities. So even if they are not permanent, the Spanish see the permanence of these very large cities, or that's how they'll describe that this is the best way to understand them. And I think the best way to understand Apache and Comanche border strength is to consider how rarely the Spanish ever attempted to cross them. And so if you think about in the mid-18th century, when tensions are rising so greatly with the Comanches, what they will say, presidial commanders will say is, we're taking men, we're gonna go stand up to the Comanches. And they hit the Guadalupe River, and then they all stop short. And they're like, no, we're not going. And the presidial officers are like, no, we gotta go. And the soldiers are like, no, we are not crossing the Guadalupe River. We know that is where we enter Comanche territory, and we'll all die. And so the power of that border stands and is real. Or throughout this time period as well, if you look at where San Antonio de Bejar is, and then look at that nice bold line marking the edge of Comancheria. What presidial officers would report every single day is that presidial guards would go and they would ride a 12-mile perimeter to the west, the north, and the east of the town. And they would check the puertas, the gateways into Comancheria, to see if there were any horse prints or footprints or any signs that they are coming to raid. So they're literally telling us, we live at the gateway to Comancheria. That is where San Antonio is. So we live on the border of Comancheria. So I would ask you to stop and consider for a moment how amazing this is. Because Texas was part of the periphery of the largest and most profitable European empire in the Americas. New Spain had over 1 million Spanish colonists. They had 2 million Indian subjects. The capital, Mexico City, was famous for its Baroque architecture. It was the most sophisticated metropolis in the entire Western Hemisphere. It had broad avenues. It had one of the world's greatest universities. And yet, if you lived in Texas, it was far more important that you lived on this periphery. that your day-to-day existence and your survival was far more contingent on living on the borders of Comancheria and then also Apacheria. And I think we sometimes forget how powerful the Apaches were because we think the Comanches were more dominant. And if you think then about this moment in the late 18th century, right, the fear is not how are we going to keep pushing north and how are we going to conquer them. The fear is that the Comanches are going to invade Mexico and that, in fact, they're going to get all the way to Mexico City. And so, let me get another map. This is why maps look like this. The Spanish knew they came up north and then they hit a wall and they stopped drawing lines because they couldn't anymore. And if we look at this more clearly map, and they're going to build a Maginot Line of presidios across the northern provinces, right? We're going to have a presidio every 100 miles, and somehow that's going to hold off Comanche and Apache invasion. So they're not talking conquest. They're talking, oh my gosh, how do we keep them from conquering us? And so we go back to this map. And we pause to consider what Texas, I think, gives us this phenomenal lesson in about early American history. In 1800, 300 years after Columbus, 25 years after the Declaration of Independence, 75% of the continent is still in the hands of Indian nations who control their borders and defend them mightily. 50% of what the United States claims as sovereign US territory is actually still in the hands of Indian nations who control and defend their borders. So of course, Europeans knew very well where their borders ended and where Indians began. And they knew that this was a land of foreign diplomacy. So I will stop there. Thank you so much.